Good afternoon. I have the great pleasure today to be able to moderate this breast cancer tumor board for us. We're going to discuss some very interesting cases, complex clinical decision pathways, and I'm honored to be joined by my esteemed panelists. I'm going to start with Dr. O'Shaughnessy, if you would like to introduce yourself, and then we'll just jump right in. Dr. O'Shaughnessy.
Hi, I'm Joyce O'Shaughnessy. I'm a breast medical oncologist. I work at Baylor University Medical Center, Texas Oncology and US Oncology in Dallas, Texas. Real pleasure to be here with everyone.
Hi, I'm Tom Buchholz. I'm the medical director of Scripps MD Anderson Cancer Center in San Diego, and I'm a breast cancer radiation oncologist.
Hi, I'm Rennie Butler. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Diagnostic Radiology and Biomedical Imaging at Yale. I specialize in breast imaging, and I'm delighted to be with you all.
Dave Mamones, a breast surgical oncologist. I work at Orlando Health Cancer Institute. I direct the breast program there.
A 69-year-old lady with a history of clinical T2N1A, ERPR positive, HER2 negative, left breast invasive carcinoma, status post lumpectomy, adjuvant chemotherapy and radiation, now with a local recurrence in the left supraclavicular region and internal mammary nodes without any evidence of otherwise systemic metastatic disease. And so the question being posed is, what is the recommendation for next steps of treatment? So this patient presented with a palpable painless nodule in the left supraclavicular region. She has a good performance status ECOG1. Her medical history includes hypertension and depression, gynecologic history. She was postmenopausal at 51, no significant hormone replacement, no significant social history, family history notable only for a mother with colon cancer diagnosed at the age of 60. In 1992, she had a left ERPR positive breast cancer treated with lumpectomy, 6 weeks of chemotherapy and adjuvant radiation to the left whole breast and regional nodes, and completed 5 years of adjuvant tamoxifen. Subsequently, in February of 2020, she underwent an excisional biopsy of the palpated left supraclavicular node. This demonstrated invasive ductal carcinoma, ERPR positive, HER2 negative. Additional molecular testing, as you see here, based on KRAS testing, demonstrated MSI stable, TMB of 5, which is low, PIK3CA exon 10 positive, PTEN positive, MLH1 positive, MSH2 positive, MSH6 positive. You can see there the BRCA 1 and 2 were negative, PDL1 negative, and ESR1 was negative. So quite a lot of data there. And Dr. Butler, do you want to walk us through some of this imaging at the time of recurrence when she was able to feel this supraclavicular mass?
Sure. The image on the bottom shows just some very subtle FDG avid area of uptake where she had her supraclavicular lymph node excision without any residual mass. In the image at the top, however, we see a soft tissue mass involving the left portion of the sternum with some osseous destruction that we can also appreciate as we look through the bony fragments there. In a bone scan that's not shown, there was subtle tracer uptake in the left sternoclavicular joint without evidence of sternal invasion.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So in March of 2020, she was started on letrozole and a CDK4/6 inhibitor, palbociclib. The palbociclib required a dose reduction to 100 milligrams secondary to mucositis. Subsequently, in August of 2020, she had consolidative proton re-irradiation therapy to the left breast and regional nodes, including internal mammary and supraclavicular nodes. This was 42.56 cobalt gray equivalents in 16 fractions with a 10 cobalt gray equivalent boost in 5 fractions. And so I might ask Dr. Buchholz, do you want to comment on this radiation approach? And is this how you would approach this patient given the sort of isolated regional recurrence?
Yeah, reirradiation is always a complex issue that you have to carefully consider multiple components. The good news for this is her radiation was really a long time ago, right? It's coming up nearly, not quite 20 years. And over that time, you do have some recovery of the radiation effects of the normal tissues. The other thing is what volumes to treat. We particularly like to stay away from reirradiation of the supraclavicular fossa, which in this case really wasn't an option, because one of the devastating side effects would be a brachial plexopathy or a damage to the brachial plexus from radiation. But I think it's reasonable, given that she has such a long interval to her recurrence, meaning that the local regional aspects of her disease are equally important as systemic treatments, to consider reirradiation. I like the dose selection. It seems like a reasonable trade-off between minimization of total cumulative dose and also getting in at least some therapeutics. The issue with using protons versus conventional treatments, again, is really unclear. I'm not sure that proton will preferentially spare any dose to the brachial plexus or spare any dose to the heart that you could not achieve with just combinations of electrons and photons that are used. So I think it would be reasonable. It's not unreasonable to use protons. It's not going to be biologically any better or biologically any worse, but it will shape the dose a little bit differently and potentially can spare some of the underlying intrathoracic contents. But the real organs of risk are the chest wall and the brachial plexus are most concerning. And those are going to be receiving the same dose with conventional photon electron treatments versus protons.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your insight about that. Dr. Mamounez, can I ask you, I recently had a similar patient in my practice, not quite such a long interval, but just presented with an axillary supraclavicular recurrence. And that patient had not undergone any, she had had post-mastectomy radiation, but it had not included the supraclavicular region. And so it really was an isolated sort of recurrence, not really a treatment failure of the adjuvant radiation, but really just a recurrence there in the supraclavicular fossa. Would you ever consider a surgical approach for that patient that has just an isolated supraclavicular recurrence?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can consider it if it's an isolated one, minimizing then the potential residual disease for radiation oncologists. On the opposite, if there's more than one, and we rely on the radiation for these patients. But yeah, for an isolated one that's fairly superficial and can easily be removed, I think you can consider resection.
Okay.
I like this approach that they did as well, where they treat with kind of neoadjuvant, if you will, hormonal therapy in an effort to downstage the disease and render a lower tumor burden that the radiation has to treat that too. That would be another reasonable approach. We know she probably has very endocrine sensitive disease just because of her extremely long history of quiescence before recurrence.
Great point. And so, Dr. O'Shaughnessy, what would you favor at this point for next steps in treatment? Understanding that, she was started on this sort of, pre-radiation endocrine therapy with CDK4/6 inhibitor, demonstrated a fairly good response, no evidence of other distant systemic disease, and had this sort of re-irradiation. How would you approach her systemic therapy now?
Well, one thing I think is very important, she did have a long disease-free interval, and so she was quite young at original diagnosis. And though she has no family history of breast or ovarian cancer, I think germline panel testing, not only BRCA 1 and 2, but a broad panel for her and for her family, I think is important for her as well. The germline BRCA 1, 2 could give her another therapeutic option in a PARP inhibitor, either olaparib or talazoparib down the road. I think I would continue with the current endocrine therapy and palbociclib. And I would consider her as metastatic disease with the disease in the sternum and the extraosseous disease. It's minimal disease. And now she's kind of NED with excellent radiation therapy that's occurred, but I still consider her metastatic disease. And so I would favor continuing the CDK4/6 inhibitor and the aromatase inhibitor. One thing I'll just mention, and again, she started therapy before these important new data came out at ESMO, which is from the Mona Lisa 2 trial showing an overall survival advantage with ribociclib plus letrozole. I think we're waiting for the results with the palbociclib. Hopefully that will be positive too with regard to survival from the Paloma 2 data. We don't have that quite yet. So I would favor, I think there's survival to be had with these agents. And so I would favor continuing the CDK4/6 inhibitor. I probably would also consider an anti-osteoclast agent, probably zoledronic acid, maybe twice a year, maybe every 3 months to start off with for a couple of years, and every 6 months. It's not exactly clear what the optimal schedule of bisphosphonate is in a stage 4 NED type situation, but I probably would favor the use of a bisphosphonate at least for a few years.
Okay, perfect. So to summarize, we would recommend continuation of the aromatase inhibitor in combination with the CDK4/6 inhibitor, in addition to potentially an anti-osteoclast agent. And we would definitely recommend germline testing to inform future therapy, potentially with a PARP inhibitor. So we're gonna jump to another patient with sort of a different situation. This is a 62-year-old Caucasian female with a history of anatomic stage 2A and pathologic prognostic stage 1B, ER and PR positive, HER2 negative, right invasive micropapillary breast cancer, who completed mastectomy and sentinel lymph node biopsy with one positive lymph node with macrometastasis of 0.5 centimeters and grade 3 DCIS. Her history is notable for right DCIS, which was grade 1, ER/PR positive, which was diagnosed in 2015, treated at that time with lumpectomy. At that time, the patient had declined adjuvant radiation therapy and adjuvant endocrine therapy. And so the question that is being posed at this point is, can the patient's axilla be treated with radiation alone, or does she require an axillary lymph node dissection? So Dr. Butler, do you want to go over with us some of this pertinent imaging?
Sure. In this sagittal image from her breast MRI, we see quite an extensive area of non-mass enhancement that might be best described as linear and clumped, which we often see with DCIS, although that can also be associated with an invasive component. And this area extends primarily in the anteroposterior dimension for approximately 5 to 6 centimeters.
Okay, perfect. And so Dr. Menounos, do you want to comment about, would you favor surgery or radiation in this situation?
Well, more and more nowadays, I think we try not to complete the axillary dissection if patients meet certain criteria that we can put them in. Some of the studies that have shown the safety, oncologic safety of sentinel lymph node biopsy alone, either with or without radiation. Now, when the patient has a mastectomy, obviously the ACOSOC Z11 that randomized patients to completion axillary dissection or not after a positive sentinel node, 1 to 3 positive, 1 to 2 positive sentinel nodes. There were no mastectomy patients in that trial, but there were other trials, one from the IBCSG with micrometastases, 1 to 3 micrometastases, more than one actually micrometastases that had some mastectomy patients, and there also completion axillary dissection did not show a significant improvement in overall survival. But also the Amaros trial, which compared completion axillary dissection versus axillary radiation and showed no significant differences in local recurrence, particularly axillary recurrence, but with radiation significantly reduced lymphedema for patients that had radiation versus completion axillary dissection. We tend to favor more of the radiotherapy approach to these patients. So typically you either have the option of not radiating the undissected axilla if the burden of disease is fairly low, or if you're concerned the burden of disease is a little higher, to complete it, to do axillary radiation. In the Amaros trial, actually about 33% of the patients had residual disease in the non-sentinel nodes when they had an axillary dissection. So you would assume that the patients that received radiation had about the same percentage, and yet radiation was very effective in controlling the disease with minimal, with significantly less lymphedema. So I would favor a radiation approach to the axilla or observation, unless for some reason the oncologist would say, well, I need to know if there are additional lymph nodes involved, in which case sometimes we will go to axillary dissection to provide that information. But the patient had 1 out of 2 sentinel nodes with a 0.5 centimeter, 5 millimeter micrometastasis. So I think I would favor radiotherapy, but let's see what Dr. Buchholz has to say.
Dr. Buchholz?
Well, thanks. I favor some additional axillary treatment. This is a little bit unusual case because she does have a previous history of breast cancer, or DCIS anyway, in this breast. And so is it right to consider this as a brand new breast primary, or is it more biologically unfavorable? Because in essence, this is an invasive recurrence after previous history of DCIS in the breast. And accordingly, we might want to be more aggressive with consideration of post-mastectomy radiation. If someone has a very, over the age of 60 with a very biologically favorable ER/PR positive and just one small metastasis in one lymph node, then you have to question whether the morbidity of doing axillary radiation is greater or less than just doing a completion dissection. And if the completion dissection yields no additional disease, the plan would be to do no radiation in the post-mastectomy setting. Here, I think with the history of being recurrence, it's appropriate to consider doing post-mastectomy radiation anyway. And if you're going to be committed to doing radiation, then I agree with Dr. Mahmoudis that the combination of doing an axillary dissection plus adjuvant radiation is probably not the best approach. And we would just use the radiation like we would be treating the supraclavicular lymph nodes without surgery, and using the radiation there, we could certainly treat the lower axilla too. It'd be important to, again, anatomically map those out during CT treatment planning and assure you're treating the dose. I think, historically, radiation oncologists always used to treat after an axillary dissection. We're used to treating the higher axilla, the level 3 axilla and the supraclavicular fossa. And so when you're treating the level 1-2 axilla, which are probably the most important area of residual nodal disease, it's important to map those out on the CT treatment planning scan to assure that you're covering them adequately.
Okay, thank you so much. And it was mentioned, Dr. O'Shaughnessy, that so often we as medical oncologists are needing to have a thorough understanding of axillary nodal involvement to inform our adjuvant therapy recommendations. Do you feel in this situation that information is needed, or would that not really change your adjuvant therapy recommendations?
Yeah, I don't think it would change my adjuvant therapy recommendations. Is still, she'll need an aromatase inhibitor for 10 years. The question of chemo, no chemo could be put to a 70 gene signature or a 21 gene recurrence score. IV zoledronic acid would be appropriate. The issue of 2 years of abemaciclib could also be looked at with whether the key 67 was 20% or more. So our adjuvant decisions would really be based on the fact that she does have a positive node, but whether she had one or two additional ones would not change my thinking about what she needed for adjuvant therapy.
Great. Okay. So in summary, we would definitely favor, as a multidisciplinary group, additional axillary treatment. In this particular case, it seems that just the radiation therapy alone would be adequate, and an axillary lymph node dissection is not necessarily required.